Wednesday, December 3rd, and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll pick a chair and a clerk for the meeting.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, because
They're two different things, but you can look at it.
because Beth is on Zoom, she is officially absent of this meeting, but she wanted to be able to hear and be part of it. So, and then Sue is away at a conference and could not be here. So we need to pick a chair and a clerk for the meeting. Does anybody have any suggestions? Nobody wants to raise their hand.
I'll share it if you want me to.
Then Matt.
You can do it, you're doing a fine job.
Okay, how about I chair and you clerk? Is that, I'm not sure what you have to do, but.
I don't either.
Keep minutes, but she's keeping minutes.
If everybody's in favor of me sitting as chair and Mindy as clerk, then, do you agree? Say aye.
Yes, aye.
I guess.
You guys really like our jobs, huh?
I was going to say, I don't really do a good job of this. Ann, can we do it?
No. Nobody wanted a chair or the clerk. It's funny.
Okay, Bartlett,
Yes.
M. Cortade,
Here,
Walters,
Present.
and Cook.
Here.
That's all we got.
So review of conflicts, so the agenda, all we have on the agenda today is the lift station number 1 and the funding and financing for that. So is there any conflicts of interest? Then we need an approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda of Wednesday, December 3rd, 2025.
Support.
And,
Quick question for you, Tracy. Is Garth there?
yes?
I did not put on the agenda. I didn't know if I would have somebody there from Wade Trim, but they did have their pre-construction meeting today. So before you guys get into the financing, he can offer a quick update for you guys on the status of the contracts and the contractors.
Okay. Just remind me, because I'll probably forget it in the 2 minutes between now and then. So all in favor of the agenda,
Aye.
answer by aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Okay. We have a public comment. We don't see any public unless Dawn wants to comment before. Okay, and then, so Garth, do you want to give us an update on the pre-construct meeting you had today?
So today we held a pre-construction meeting for contract 1 of the force main project here at the township. We had a good attendance. The contractor, their primary directional drilling subcontractor, the city of Traverse City, MDOT Rail, and a few others showed up to the meeting. The only ones that didn't come were utilities, primarily. TART dialed in and listened in on it. The meeting went well. The contractor, given that winter is already hitting heavy, is presented a schedule, a rough schedule, outlining when they anticipate to start and finish work. They are looking to start work around the 1st of April, frost law permitting. Working through the summer and have a current goal of closing out the project by the 17th of September.
Okay.
Knowing how these projects can go, I will warn everyone now that a lot can change between now and then, and they know that too.
The 17th of September.
I hope it is. So they are going to begin the process of submitting shop drawings to us. We emphasized with them the importance of the emergency response plan in case of a main break. And so they'll be submitting a detailed plan to us, the DPW and the city for review. They will have a emergency spill plan. And then there's a couple of other just kind of housekeeping submittals that they'll be submitting to us over the winter, well in advance of getting on site. We emphasized the need for them to coordinate well with the city because the city's got an ongoing treatment plant project going on right now. They sounded more than willing to do that. Let me check my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. That pretty well wraps it up. It was a straightforward meeting. It's really more of a kickoff meeting than a pre-construction meeting, just to get everybody introduced to all of the involved parties. And given that construction is 4+ months out, it was just a good way to kick things off now that the contract has been fully executed by both the township and the contractor.
Okay.
So.
And I see, I think Acme's engineers were there too?
Yep. Yeah, Mark from Gosling was in attendance.
Okay. All right.
Any questions for me?
Remind me the linear footage of the project.
3,570 feet of 16-inch and then 1,000 and change of 18-inch. And it switches to 18-inch when you enter the Hall Park area and then move north and then west into the treatment plant.
Okay. So, shy of a mile.
Yes, yep. And they will be directional drilling the majority of that pipe. They've got a little bit of open cut they'll have to do, primarily within the treatment plant area. They've got some required bore and jack that they'll have to do below the railroad. Bore and jack just keeps the pipe in steel casing. It's better for both parties. So,
Just setting expectations, I was just kind of running some numbers here based on the schedule. Seems pretty aggressive for what they're doing and where they're going to be.
yeah, it's certainly doable. My main caveat with tempering everybody on schedule expectations is just the number of utility conflicts, number one, and complexity with dancing around that existing sewer main. One of the biggest things we emphasize throughout the meeting is that existing line is the sanitary sewer artery of East Bay Township, Acme Township, and a portion of Garfield Township. So we mentioned that multiple times throughout the meeting.
You may have mentioned this a second ago. You said they're going through shop drawings and stuff. Is that emergency response plan part of that?
The emergency response plan is separate from the shop drawings. Shop drawings are just submittals of all the materials that'll be used on the project. The response plan is separate. It's not required on all projects, but it is on this one. It'll involve how many frac tanks, which are on-site storage tanks they intend to have, how many tankers they have, response times, all of that. We emphasized that we wanted to see all of that because based on the DPW's estimations, there's about 15 minutes of buffer in the existing lift station between when a failure occurs and when a overflow occurs. So they'll.
Was that a part of the discussion today? In the brief?
Yes, yep.
But that'll be a deliverable that'll be
Yeah.
in your hands to review prior to breaking
Yep.
ground.
Yep, and we'll provide commentary on it. The DPW and the city will both have a chance to provide commentary on it. Given that there is another contract involved with this project, we also brought up the benefit to not only both contractors, but to everybody at large of looking at working with the other contractor, the contract one contractor, to contractor to share resources and hopefully coordinate plans with each other. Because if the main goes down anywhere, whether it's in contract 1 or contract 2, the main's down.
Yeah.
So everybody needs to be operating in unison on that front. So,
Are there any, back to the schedule, are there any liquidated damages for?
yeah, $2,000 a day if they exceed the substantial completion date. The substantial completion date is 365 days from today.
Okay.
So, and then final completion is January 3rd or 4th. Any other questions? Great. Well, I'm here if you need me for anything else. Thanks.
Thanks, Garth. Okay, so now we're going to have Dawn Lund. This is Dawn Lund from Utility Financial Solutions. I think you all remember, she's been here a couple of times, so I think y'all may remember her. But she's the one that provided all this information for us to go over tonight.
Thank you for being out there. I think we're good. Perfect. Well, good evening. It's good to see you all again. I'm Dawn Lund, Vice President of Utility Financial Solutions, and I've presented in front of either all of or most of you before. The project we worked on for you was a financial projection for the wastewater department. So I'm going to go through my significant assumptions and kind of walk you through the financial projection and walk through some of those findings. Of course, if you have any questions as we go through this, just let me know. And I'm frozen here. Let's try this. It was working a minute ago.
Okay.
What was the gentleman's name that was helping before? Matt?
It's Matt Kern. I'm trying to advance the slide. I just double clicked on it and that seemed to work, but the arrows aren't working for some
Okay,
reason.
now it's working. Perfect. Thank you, Matt.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
So again, what a financial projection is we look at your revenues, your expenses, your capital, any potential debt, and we incorporate that all in a financial projection, and we look at your cash flow, and we look at certain key targets, which I'm going to review with you tonight. It's frozen again. So I'll just say, next slide if that works. Here we go. So some of the significant assumptions I want to go over with you is I wanted to lay out all the expenses for you because you actually have expenses come in mainly two ways. One, you have local expenses for the system that's recorded through your local trial balance, meaning you guys record expenses here or at your office, the salaries and those types of things. That's the first line item that you see, East Bay trial balance. So I wanted to show you that line item that I'm including those expenses. You also get charged through Grand Traverse County's DPW. Those line items, let's start with the next four: personnel, commodities, contractual services, and other charges. Those are expenses that you have seen year over year. So those get passed through to you through an invoice, your treatment expense, and you pay those. In addition, the DPW does have sometimes special projects that you also get billed for. You share in a percentage of that. What you have right now are 3 projects that are special projects, if you will, that you share in the cost of. One of the projects right now is their SCADA project. You will be assigned $75,000 for 2 years for that project in the wastewater department. You also, they are replacing the membranes. There are 8 membranes at the wastewater treatment plant. They have a 10-year useful life. So what they try to do is do one membrane a year, and then you get a 2-year lag, and they start that process all over. You just came off your 2-year lag, so they're starting that process over of replacing those 8 membranes at the wastewater plant. That's the membrane line item. You pay about 20% of that. Each township gets assigned their share. Your share happens to be just slightly over 20%, and that's what that line item represents. The next line item is the $41 million expansion. You pay a little over 20% of that as well. Each township pays their share of that. You can see that those expenses, you're paying for the next 3 years interest only, your share of that. And then in 2029, that full payment kicks in. That payment will last through 2048. So that's a long-term debt payment there. So SCADA, again, drops off after 2 years. The membranes drop off after 8 years. And then the $41 million will drop off in 2048. So in addition to that, the depreciation line, you have some significant capital improvement projects in the horizon. And of course, the unique thing about some of those capital improvement projects is although you're sharing them, if you will, with Acme, East Bay is the owner of those. So you will reflect those on your books, and you will be the one responsible for any borrowing, any debt for those assets, because they really are East Bay's assets. Of course, a couple assets that I'm going to talk about, a couple projects I'm going to talk about, Acme will share in the cost of those, and that is the next slide I'm going to go over. Are there any questions on these expense items before I move on? Okay. Let's review the revenue side just real quickly. Obviously, you have disposal charges. Those are your regular rates that you charge your ratepayers. You have something called benefit fees. You've actually enjoyed some nice benefit fees. In 2025 especially, you'll see a pretty substantial benefit fee. That's going to drop off, projected to drop off in 2026. And of course, from there on out, we were conservative. That could be robust, more robust in the future. We don't really know. But what we know that is hanging out there, if you will, we've accounted for that on the revenue side. The next line item, historical finance benefits. Those are benefits that have been financed in the past, and that's in general what you get per year from those finance benefits. Other revenue is very small. The special assessment is very small, so let's concentrate on the next 2 line items. The debt payment from Acme for the Interceptor is the debt payment for the new Interceptor. What will happen is East Bay will issue the debt, and then I'm assuming send an invoice or the debt schedule, however that's going to work, to Acme, and they will pay their fair share of that debt, which is give or take a little around about 39%. The debt, the next payment you see there would be the debt payment that Acme would owe East Bay for the lining of the old Interceptor. So once the new Interceptor project is done, a couple years out, there is a larger project, about $8.1 million, to line the old Interceptor, and Acme would share in about 39% of that as well, and that's what that debt payment is. Are there any questions on the revenue side? So obviously, if anything changes on the revenue or expense side, this is the best data we have today. Did you have a question?
Since these are assumptions, the debt payment for the Acme piece of the Interceptor, what financing assumptions were built into that?
Awesome question, because that's going to be a big topic that I'm going to talk about tonight. So in July of, I think, 25th, 2025, or July 28th, you guys signed an ordinance, and the debt laid out in there was a 10-year payback. And the bond market right now is about 4%. So it would be 10 years at 4% that I have in this slide. As I go throughout the presentation, I am going to bring up considering a 20-year payback because you're going to see the financial situation, the financial summaries for East Bay. Acme's looked very similar. And one of the things that's putting a little bit of strain, if you will, on the financial parts of the system is that 10-year payback. Anytime you have a really aggressive payback like that, obviously the debt payment has to be higher. And so what happens is East Bay takes out that whole debt, right? It's on their books, the whole almost 4 million, it's 138. That'll be on their books, your books, and then Acme will pay their, about $518,000 of that payment. And that's currently at the 10 years, but I am going to show you a summary with a 20-year payback too. But currently, your ordinance, there's a couple things about that ordinance. One, if the boards choose, it seems like there's an open door there to discuss that, because what was approved in July is that East Bay could issue debt up to $6 million maximum with a 10-year payback. And so the project actually came in much higher, and the systems East Bay would need to borrow a little over 11 million. So the ordinance that was signed in July would need to be revised anyway. So the door seems to be open there for discussion of extending that to 20 years instead of 10. I'm going to show you both options today. I ran it like you currently have approved, and then I ran it with an option. Good question. So just real quick, this is just a little bit more detail on that, but I already told you everything there. The SCADA, that's a schedule right from Grand Traverse DPW. The membranes, and the 41 million, you pay about 20% of that. The ordinance only outlines $6 million right now, but I just assumed to run the 11 million at the 10 years at the bond rate of 4%, and that East Bay would contribute $1 million towards the project, Acme would contribute $1 million towards the project, and you have a $3 million grant. I'm going to show you another option coming up soon, but I ran it like you currently have it approved. So I did want to touch on some interfund loan discussion. I did get some questions on that. And so I want to go through that a little bit. So East Bay right now currently has obviously a water and wastewater department, and the cash funds in both of those funds are currently healthy. You're going to see in the financial projection, the cash in the wastewater spends down pretty quickly and is depleted over the next 5 years. The water department spends down about half. So you've got not only the 2 shared joint projects with Acme, but you have another $5 million project and a $1.9 million project, totally East Bay's sole capital improvements. On the water side, you've got about a $5 million project. So although we look at the cash balances today, they seem robust, those are going to spend down very quickly, and I'm going to show you that. So that's one. 2 is inter-fund loans between municipal departments are acceptable. There's some strict standards that go with that. It has to be temporary, meaning it has to be paid back. There has to be a schedule, and there has to be interest. So there are strict guidelines to follow around that. However, in general, inter-fund loan can be discouraged. Each of these funds are an enterprise fund. They should stand on their own. They should cover their own revenues, their own expenses, their own bonding, and so forth. Also, the Michigan environment is very sensitive. I would steer clear of inter-fund loan borrowing. We've got a very aggressive environment in Michigan for rate challenges. And the thought behind that is, if you can be a bank, are you using your cash wisely? Especially, it's a little bit different when you can borrow within East Bay itself. But once you start intermingling and considering borrowing for another community, could be viewed as treating that cash like a bank. So it's obviously, again, we do see interfund loans. I think in the Michigan environment especially, you should be aware that that's very sensitive. So I would discourage that. So that leads us to our financial projection summary. This financial projection summary is showing you the revenues I showed you, assumptions, the expense assumptions I showed you, also running that debt over 10 years currently. I'm going to show you a table with it over 20 years as well. But you can see the Acme contribution of $1 million for the new interceptor, the grant of $3 million, the Acme cash contribution, that $500,000 in 2029 is for the old interceptor lining. Acme has seen these assumptions. I presented to them last night that they would contribute $1 million towards the new interceptor and $500,000 towards the lining of the old interceptor. So what that leaves us is there's 3 key targets I want to talk about briefly. 1, operating income, cash balances, and debt coverage ratio. Operating income, in our perfect world, we would fully fund operating income always. We would have a rate of return of right around 4% on our assets we've invested, and we would fully fund that. But for this particular case, that's probably the 3rd target I'm worried about. I want to worry about the targets of the cash balance and the debt coverage ratio, because remember, East Bay is responsible for all the debt on the 2 projects and any consideration of debt on their own projects moving forward. So when we look at that, you can see the adjusted operating income is pretty stable. What's really affecting that is that those cash payments coming from Acme, those bond payments I treat as revenue coming in, because I don't want you to get dinged on the debt coverage ratio side. I want that to flow through, that we're accounting for that. The cash balance there, you can see depletes over the 5-year period. What's driving that is obviously we've got that capital improvement program, we've got that large capital improvement, we got the 1.9, the 8.3 million is that lining of the old interceptor, and then a $5 million project in 2030. Now, the engineer had a note in 2030 that there's some televising going on that could be done in pieces. But for financial planning purposes, I don't know exactly when that will happen. I don't think they know exactly when that'll happen, so we have to plan for it, right? It could happen in 2030, or you might piecemeal that at whatever per year the next couple years after that. So, but we need to plan for that. And most importantly is that debt coverage ratio column. So what that column is showing you is debt coverage ratio. All that is it's a measurement of debt affordability. Can I afford the debt I have in the system? Am I cash flowing enough from operations each year to pay my debt service payment? Notice I didn't say, do I have enough cash on hand to pay my debt payment? It's, am I putting in the proper rates and cash flowing enough that I can sustain my debt service payment and always pay that out of the cash flow each year from operations. Anything below a 1 in that column is telling you that you are not cash flowing enough from operations to pay your debt service payment. What's really driving that up is that 10-year payback schedule. I'm going to show you both options, 10 and 20 year, and you'll see it in the financial statistics. But obviously, what this is showing you is this table without any rate adjustments. You currently have, both in water and wastewater, 3.5% rate adjustments projected over each of the next 5 years. And we're going to talk about that as we move forward. But before we do that, do you have any questions on this slide or this summary or what went into the summary?
Dawn, I just have one comment, maybe 2, for the board to realize that $8.3 million of the relining of the line that we're replacing, that is if the full line needs to be done a cured in place pipe across the whole thing. We don't know that to be the case. Part of this whole issue is we have to get in there and televise that once the new line is in. So we are planning for it as though it were a decrepit, 50-some-year-old line that we think that it is, and that we've had breaks in. But it is possible that only portions of it may need to be repaired. And that $5 million is the same situation up on US 31.
Beth, thank you for those comments. So if we look at the 2029, and what Beth is saying, the 8.3, we don't really know what that's going to be. That's like if the whole line needs to be replaced. But if you look over at the bond issuance, 6.8 million in this scenario, you're borrowing, Acme's contributing 500,000 towards that. East Bay would have to borrow 6.8 million for that project. So let's pretend that project is only 3 million instead of the 8.3. Just in your brain, in your mind, you can deduct 5.3 from the 6.8. You see what I mean? So what's going to happen is you're just going to borrow less because most of that project would have to be borrowed for anyway. Does that make sense? So same thing, the $5 million right now, I'm going to explain something in the next slide about that. Right now, we're showing that completely cash funded. You would have to decide at that time. If you enjoy higher benefits like you have been enjoying, you'll most likely be able to pay cash for that. If things, if capital is lagging a little bit, which we see all the time, you might have a little bit more cash and not go down as low as projected for 2030 as we have up there. This is the best information we have today. So my last slide here is you can't set it and forget it. You guys have a lot of stuff going on. So today is the best information we have, but this really needs to be updated every year with the budget process, whether you do that internally and track your revenues, track your expenses, track your cash, or you consider, having it professionally done every 3 years or when the dust settles here. We can't just set this and forget it because you've got a lot of different things coming at you.
I was just curious, since 2026 is next year, how come there's not a debt coverage ratio? Do we know what that is?
Well, because right now, you don't have debt in the utility, in the wastewater utility. So by the time you get that project going and have to borrow and owe your first debt payment, it'll most likely hit in 2027.
Yeah.
Good question.
There's no debt to calculate the debt.
Correct.
Right.
Yep. So you're going from, no debt to pretty leveraged over a short period of time. Yes.
At the bottom, you have the minimum target for 2026 and 2030. And in the far right, in the debt coverage ratio, you have 1.25 and 1.45.
Super great question, because I wanted to address that. So the first one, the cash balance. I look at a formula to determine what your minimum cash should hold according to risks that you have. The 4 areas that I look at are operating, maintenance, and maintenance expenses. I want you to be able to cash flow your regular expenses. You have a 45-day working capital lag typically when you bill monthly. You spend all your expenses, you send out your bills, there's a 45-day working capital lag by the time you get your money back. So I want you to be able to pay your bills. Second thing I look at is historical investment in the system. You have infrastructure sitting out there, it could have a main break, equipment failure, whatever it may be. I want you to have cash on hand to get the system up and running again. So I look at your infrastructure and say, this is how much I think you should hold for that. I look at your debt payments, which you don't currently have in the 2026 year. I want you to reserve 100% of those. I want you to always be able to make your debt payment. And I look at your 5-year capital improvement program, and whatever you're not bonding for, I want you in general to have the cash. I take 1/5 or 20% of your 5-year program, and I try to allocate that out, if you will, so you always have the cash available at the beginning of the construction season. If you tell me you're going to spend $1.9 million next year, I want you to have $1.9 million ready to do that. So when you look at this, I'm honestly more comfortable as a minimum with your cash by the end of this period, right around that $2 million mark. You're going to see that it creeps up to the 3.8 million. That's honestly, as a million or minimum, probably inflated. What's driving that up is needing that cash for that $5 million in that last year. In reality, most systems would need to bond for that. And so what would happen is it would drive, because I'm bonding for that and not holding that cash ready to do that project, it would drive that down. So the 3.8 million I would take lightly. And if you were to ask me what's the minimum the system in general should hold, I think the minimum is more closer to 2 million. But you also, as a board, can consider what you've historically held, right? You've historically held a little bit more than that. So what's your comfort level from where you've been to where you're going? But great question. In general, if you asked me what's the minimum you should hold or what's cash critical for us, I would say closer to that 2 million. So the 3.8 is a little inflated in that table. It's the math behind all that. Now that last column right there, debt coverage ratio, if you were to issue revenue bonds, your minimum covenant in your revenue bond would be about a 125. That would be right in your bond covenant. You'd be required to meet that, meaning you cash flowed 1.25 amount of your debt payment from operations, right? You've cash flowed 1, and they want you to have a buffer for periods of declining sales or whatever. So the reason the 145 is there is for financial planning purposes, especially in water and electric. We like to have even a larger buffer. We don't want you to meet just your minimum 125 debt coverage ratio because water and electric are really susceptible to weather. Sales are susceptible to weather. So we want you to drive something a little bit higher. You're going to see, that was such a great question, because you're going to see that's going to be your struggle moving forward.
So if we look at the 2029 year with the lining, assuming that we have the 8.3 million in the full lining, with this 10-year bond issue, and a debt ratio of 0.63, we're never going to be able to get that bond, would we?
Not at your current rates. Great question. See that column that has zeros right there? Not at your current rates. That's correct. A bond rating agency would look at you and say, okay, you've depleted your cash over 5 years, and you're not meeting your debt coverage ratio in right the year after we issue the debt. So that's not a good place to be. So let's look at the next slide. That'll help answer your question, I think. So how do we fix this? How do we move forward? So there's 2 tables on this slide. One is the way you currently have it approved, having that debt financed over 10 years, both the new interceptor and the lining of the old interceptor. What the table shows is in order to stabilize your operating income, stabilize your cash balance, just meeting a 1.5, these tables are on page 7.
Thank you.
Sorry about that, page 7.
I just can't see both
Yeah.
at the same time.
So your cash balance, even with the rate increases, your cash at the end of the 5-year period would be 1.5 million. Your debt coverage ratio, you can see, is still under a 1 there. So in the perfect world, you would have higher rate increases, but that's why I put table 2 in there, okay? That's why I emphasize about the 10-year versus the 20-year. So let's just take our eyes down to table 2. And if we were to finance those projects over 20 years, what happens is, obviously it lowers our debt payment. It extends the payment back period longer, but it lowers that debt payment. And it gives us the ability to have room to try to meet that debt coverage ratio, because we don't have to cash flow enough from operations at 1.3 million. We need to now cash flow more like 1.1 million for that bond payment. So it helps actually both systems, especially East Bay, since you're the one holding the debt and you're the one with the debt coverage ratio. But what it'll do on the Acme side is not make their payment so high to you.
But we still have to have the projected rate adjustment at 9.5?
Yes, so let's talk about that, and I want to get to that slide in a minute here. You currently charge a little over $25 a month for sewer. That's probably one of the lowest rates I've seen, and I've done this for 30 years. So 9.5 sounds very scary, right? The percentages sound scary, but that equates to $2.50 a month to your ratepayer. So, of course, and I have a table showing you all those rates. If you were to take the US EPA standards for wastewater affordability, it's on the low side, 2.5% of the median household income, on the high side, 4.5. So let's take the 2.5% of the median household income. I want to be on that low threshold. I just Googled what's the median household income in East Bay, and it's about $83,000. If you do that, the minimum considered, and it's not a hard and fast number, it's a guide, okay? So it's not a standard, it's just a guide to check that. That's about $150 a month. So I'm going to get to all that, I'm jumping way ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
But no, great question. The 9.5 sounds scary, but I think you guys will see the rate progression there.
And we have not raised the rate for a number of years. I mean, I can't even remember. You probably know when we last raised it. We just raised it this year in '25.
Yeah, so it was a while before
It was
that.
a
We did
long
the
time
studies
ago.
back in 2023, and I think you just took action recently.
Yeah, we just raised it in '25, but,
Yeah.
Tracy,
yeah. Go ahead, Beth.
Tracy, you're correct. We just did a 3.5% on both funds.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, and I think Don's going to get to this, is we were looking at, gosh, we're, not excited about it looking at 9.5%. But when you put it in relation, we also looked at the water fund, and that is where we don't necessarily need the rate adjustment. So we can look at bringing that rate down to even 0 for a period of time while we have the 9.5% with the sewer. And then the other thing I wanted to mention too, with the 10-year and the 20-year, is just like when we look at roads and we tell residents that we will only finance for the, you try to match the life of the asset, or close, that's kind of the thought process you go through. Very similar to this. In 10 years, you're financing an infrastructure piece that's going to last you over 40 years, more likely 50 years.
Yeah.
So the 20-year, while that sounds long, it is not long in the perspective of how long the asset will last the township.
Right, I think Brian told us years ago, it's 50-year lifespan for infrastructure for water and sewer. And I know when we had debt on when I came, it was 20 years ago, but the debts were all like 20 to 30 years long. So we've cleaned those all up over the last several years, so.
Great. Okay. Any other comments, Beth?
No, just that, I think that it's a noble goal to try to finance it for less, right? Because less cost is great. But when you're looking at such a huge investment in infrastructure, there's a reason and a rationale to look at longer. Thanks, Don.
So this next slide, I debated on even putting in here and probably shouldn't have in retrospect. Beth, I don't even think you saw this slide, but right before the meeting, I was trying to anticipate a question, right? I was trying to anticipate if you guys said, okay, if we finance this over 20 years instead of 10, can we pay more down instead of the $1 million? Mm-hmm. So I anticipated that question. This is going to get a little deep, you guys, but I think you can handle it. This is the same table that you've already seen. So let's say, what is the maximum we are comfortable pulling today, knowing we've got the relining coming in the future, the 1.9 million and the 5 million and the possible 8.3. So I backed into this. This is what gets confusing here. But what's unique about your situation is you guys are the one issuing the debt for joint communities, all right? So if right now, the way it currently is, you would have to borrow $11 million because you guys are only putting down 1 million and Acme's putting down 1 million. But I said, okay, what is the max we can put down today, knowing that we have to borrow for the lining? So what's unique about that is the joint projects for you guys are the 16 million and the 8.3, all right? So when we go to borrow in 2029 for the 8.3, to keep it clean, the max bond that I would be able to do is 8.3, all right? So if I borrowed more or contribute more, for the whole project, if Acme's giving you 500, the max you could borrow is 7.8. If you add the 7.8 plus the 500,000, you get 8.3. The reason it's important that matches, because you can typically bond out for 3 years of projects. But the next project is a East Bay only project. So your cap, if you will, is capped by the project value. So what happens is, what capped you today, because you're gonna go, wait a minute, I have $8 million today after I only pay $1 million, why aren't I paying more? Well, because if you have this $8.3 million project, which we don't know if it's gonna be 8.3, but we have to borrow for the whole thing, so all it's gonna do is require you to borrow less, my cap is that, 7.8, because if I start borrowing more than that, I'm actually edging into the $5 million, which is an East Bay only project. That's a lot of deep discussion, but what I'm showing you is, all you're doing is if you pay $2 million down on this project, that would be your cap, but you're really just pushing it out to borrowing in this 2029 year for the relining. And what would happen in that year is the only people that contributed toward that project at that point would be Acme at the 500,000. East Bay pushed $1 million out to borrow then, and so they didn't contribute anything to that project. That's really deep, but I wanted to anticipate that question because what's unique about you is you've got a shared project now, and in 2 years, you're potentially bonding for another shared project. And we don't want any borrowing that you need to do spill over into a East Bay only project. If that makes sense. So you're kind of bound by these borrowings to keep it clean. You could borrow and spill over and then prorate it out and all of that. I'm just trying to show you a projection by keeping it clean, if you will.
Where's in the other, on page 7, is there a 500,000 in the 2029 for East Bay included in?
Not East Bay. So what happens is I don't have to include a payment, it's just gonna come out of your cash balance.
Okay, so it is in there, it's just not out of the cash balance.
Right, it's just comes out of the cash balance. You're just, instead of contributing it like Acme has to, it just comes out of your cash balance. So let's talk about the rate increase. You currently have projected a 3.5% rate increase, moving to 9.5. I just rounded these numbers, so you would say approximately 9.5. It's within a couple tenths of a percent either way. But a 9.5 sounds very scary, but it's $2.66 a month for that first rate increase. The next year, of course, would be similar, $2.75. The cumulative effect of that gets a little bit higher. By the end of the rate projection period, for 5 years, you'd be at $43.25. We talked about this minimum threshold, US EPA standards at 2.5%. That would be $175 a month, would be US EPA standards for wastewater affordability. According to that, again, it's not a hard statistic or a hard fact. It's a guide. It's not a standard, it's a guide. You can see $43 is well below the $175. You have very excellent wastewater rates and water rates.
Without calculating it, 9.5% year-over-year increases for 5 years. I mean, that's gotta be, we'll just look at the numbers going from 27 to 43. I mean.
So take 43 point,
60% increase over that time?
that's about what it is. So how to calculate that, take the 43.25 less the 27.34 and divide that number into the 27.34, and that'll give you the percentage. It's about 60%. That's exactly what Acme saw as well. So real quickly, let's go through water. Beth already brought this up. Assumptions, the only thing the water side is going to see for additional expenses is SCADA. That's from Grand Traverse County DPW. They give me that schedule, $225 or $1,000 in 2026, $75,000 in 2027. Your revenues, really quickly, because you do have a lot of other revenue, if you will, such as benefit fees. Those could come in higher or lower in the future. Your historically financed benefit fees, if you continue to get those payments, you'd get about $140,000. Your tower rental is about $264,000. You got some fire line revenue coming in, some other revenue. If any of those expenses or revenues change, this is the best data we have today. So on the water side, like I said, both funds are currently healthy. Healthy cash balances. You've got about $9.5 million in the water utility. You've got several larger projects projected in the future, about a $700,000 project in 2027, almost $5 million in 2028, and $1.7 in 2030. That's obviously spending the cash down. There's no borrowing needed there, but you're spending your cash down to about half. So you can see this table doesn't have any rate increases. That should be page two
Page
two.
of the water report, page 2.
It's on page 3,
Yeah, page 3.
top of page 3.
Thank you.
Yes. So in general, I absolutely love that you guys have a inflationary increase. I only see that probably in 10 to 20% of my communities that I work with. It's brilliant because your costs change every year, and if you can keep up with that, the rate changes to your customers are much less instead of waiting, delay, and have a big, large double-digit rate increase. So I don't like what's going to come out of my mouth next, but because I love that you're doing this. But first of all, again, let's back up. Your rates in wastewater are so low. Again, the $2.50, I see much larger dollar impacts across the country when utilities have a rate increase. So, but if the board were uncomfortable with that, you're healthy enough in the water utility that in the very short term, you could forego the water increases. What I understand is most of your customers are the same. You have the same water customers as you do wastewater customers in general. So if we can mitigate some of that increase on the water side, because the water utility is healthy, we can help the impact of the 9.5% on the wastewater side. Keep in mind, I'm showing you this table, but I don't like doing that forever. I almost stuck a little rate increase in here in 2030, just to encourage you guys to really circle back to this. But that was one option Beth and I talked about, that the water utility is healthy now. If we wanted to lessen the impact, we could consider that.
Well, we could always reduce that rate increase.
Correct. Beth and I even talked about like putting 1.5s in there or something.
Right.
But I did want to show you, this would be the floor. Except I would 99.9% of the time never encourage that, because I like what you've done. But you could consider that.
Is there a scenario where you could actually reduce this rate? I mean, I know you kind of laid this out as an assumption that we don't make any adjustments.
So I in general, wouldn't reduce the rate. It's a great question, and it's something you should really let the dust settle. all the stuff going on and keep monitoring this with your budget process. If you start getting a lot of benefits, if your benefits are more aggressive like they've been, then that cash is going to build, and you could possibly consider something like that.
And you'll recall, Matt, that we took a look at reducing some of the revenues within the water system when we took a look at benefit fees, right? And truly benefit fees and the per gallon charges, the usage charges are really all revenue. So where no matter where they come from, and the board was not comfortable with that at that point in time. So I think, like Dawn mentions, we can keep an eye on that and revisit that again potentially.
And you should. My next slide literally is, don't set it and forget it. I warned Acme as well. I think they actually took action in their ordinance, to revisit this annually, at least internally, and every 3 years professionally. So, and you guys have a lot going on. You're fortunate to be as healthy as you are, but you just have, you've prepared apparently for this, and now the time is here. And now is when you're spending your money down, and you're fortunate to have that. This scenario could be a lot worse for what you guys have for capital infrastructure needs.
Just a question, since all of the stuff, to your point, the dust has got settled, there's a ton of moving parts. The only thing that's big in here that we know in some of the assumptions table on the wastewater side is the cost of construction for the project that y'all kicked off today. Some of the contributions come from Acme. Everything else is assumptions. Rates, the bonds, like I know it's pretty well refined, but I guess my question is, between that and maybe how things will settle out with our annual contribution on the $41 million upgrade at the plant, are there potential scenarios that play out that could actually be better? Are the assumptions you put in here, is this a worst case? Is this kind of a medium case?
So this is the case for, let's go back to that, because this is a great question. The number one thing you can do to help your scenario is finance over more than 10 years. But even at that, let's look at that table. Actually, it's down here. So even at that, let's look at the rate increases. What's affecting the operating income right here are the rate increases. This column will change when you change the rate adjustments. You can see I haven't fully funded the system, but I'm not worried about that. My target today is about $300,000. My target after you do all this infrastructure, and I'm trying to do a 4% rate of return on that infrastructure, you would need to meet a $1.6 million operating income. I'm not pushing you there, right? I pushed you to almost not even half that. So it's a very, very small. And the rate of return is not a rate of return like an investor-owned utility enjoys. It's not to get too complicated, but it covers two things. One is interest expense on debt, because it's below the operating income line. And two is the inflationary increase on the assets you have invested in the system. What do I mean by that? Let's pretend you have one asset, and it's $1 million asset with a 10-year useful life. When you go to replace that in the future, that asset's going to cost you $1.3 million or something more. The $300,000 in my example is what the rate of return would recoup. So when you go to replace that asset in the future, you theoretically have the funds to do that. You've accounted for inflation. So it's a break-even rate of return for a municipal. So you're not even doing that, but I'm not worried about that. I'm more worried about your cash balance. You know, you have $10 million today. You're spending down, this is if you finance over 20 years, down to $2.5 million. You probably haven't seen that level in a while. And this debt coverage ratio right there. That's not stellar, right? You would start swinging back up in the other direction if this table went out further. You're still meeting your debt coverage ratio above a 1. It depends on if you're issuing revenue bonds, general obligation bonds. I think all that's, when during your, if this reopens, to discuss all this, that's a consideration, because a revenue bond has a 125 minimum.
Do these assumptions on the revenue side take into account additional usage on the system? So, you know, customers that'll be hooking up over the next couple of years and actually contributing to the annual revenue?
Yep, so there's not significant growth in there. The only thing, but there's not significant growth, we just kind of mirrored the benefits that were currently projected.
So you did take into consideration then because we had big revenue or big benefit revenue last year and this year because we've had big developments go in.
Correct. The 650,000, theoretically, you're going to get $650,000 this year, 2025, that's in here.
Right.
Next year, I can't,
187 too,
pardon me?
187,200.
Yeah, 187, but that was, I can't remember, I think it was 175 benefits. 20% of that was paid cash outright,
Yeah.
and the other 80%
then-
was financed, which is the 93,000 in there for the years to continue.
But the usage, I think what you're asking is the usage from those benefits will be in the years
Is it-
going forward, and that's in your projections.
That, we don't have any significant growth in there. So if you were to have significant growth, or what would happen is, this number would be a little bit healthier, right? And you're not even meeting the 1.6. Remember, I'm only getting you not even halfway there. So you could have that icing on the cake, and that would help you, because it's really not icing. You're just better funding what you should be funding. On the cash side, your cash would improve slightly, which is a good thing. 2.5 million, like I said, you probably haven't seen that amount in a while. And debt coverage ratio, if you're issuing revenue bonds, I really want that to be a 125.
Yeah.
So if you start accounting for growth like that and you don't get it, you're not seeing your real picture.
Right.
So all that's going to do is growth would help you get to your targets that you should be getting to.
Okay.
I'm trying to keep the rate increase under double digits, quite frankly.
The other thing, Don, too, and Matt is exactly right, that the 8.3 and the 5 million, we don't know those costs, you're right, Matt. But if they are less, that strengthens our position and gets us up off that 1.12 and takes that bond issue of the 6.8 million down, which is a good thing. But I would prefer that, obviously, than to not put in 8.3 and 5 million and, plan on 10 million between the two of them and then get that 13.3 number. And those numbers did come from wage trim, and I know that Brian put some effort into those. They weren't just kind of trying to figure out the number, because that 8.3, when we were generally discussing things, we were looking at originally 2 years ago or more, like 3 to 5 million. And he looked at it again based on Don's request and forwarded the 8.3 number.
All right, well, I might have me ask another question. The force main project is 16 million. We had originally, what were we originally planning on? 11, 12 million dollars for that
Yeah.
project?
11.
Did y'all put together that estimate too?
Wade Trim did put together that estimate.
I know a lot of
And-
stuff's unknown, but, are we
Yeah.
kind of prepared for a worse case than even the estimate is now for what was put together?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're right. We estimated 11 million. I think that number first was about 2 years ago or so when we first started engineering the project. We did have Wade Trim go back and look at that number as recently as before we bid out the project, within the year of when we bid out the project, and they still felt good about that number. I can only tell you that projects often surprise engineers and municipalities, and this project is certainly a hefty lift. It's a lot going on, and I think that the proposals from the contractors reflect that. And you're right, we will have to, the wastewater fund, while we are in a good place, as Dawn said, I think I heard her say earlier, look, we have a healthy fund balance, but we also have some hefty projects. We've planned for it, and now's the time when we're doing it. So we'll have to be cognizant of where we're at in that 1.12 as we're moving forward in those projects. So for example, realigning the pipe that we're replacing right now, that televising of it is going to be very important, and making sure we do the right fix on it and not necessarily over-fixing it, say. I don't think, if it weren't for the redundancy problem, if there were a way to fix that line, that's where we would be at today. But given the amount of waste on that line, where it comes from, that we have no redundancy, that we've seen what a break does, and those emergency plans that Garth talked about are going to be important, because it's not a great picture when that line breaks. I don't know if I answered the question or just added more to it, but
I was just pointing out the obvious, that sometimes we have early estimates. You don't really know the true impact until you actually get a bid, and it's not throwing shade at y'all. This is kind of an industry thing.
no, I get it. I understand.
As the paying customer, in this case East Bay Township, and the taxpayer here, we've got to be a little bit forward thinking that, hey, we maybe need to plan on some additional costs associated with what estimates are today for future projects.
So maybe 10
Yep.
million instead of 6.8.
Yeah.
And I will say, I do think that the board has historically, because there are a lot of municipalities, Dawn can tell me if I'm right or not, and maybe I'm just proud of us at East Bay, but I think there are a lot of municipalities who couldn't handle this type of infrastructure improvements over a short period of time.
Right, yeah. You guys are fortunate. You're healthy currently. And just to reiterate about the quoting of the capital projects, we're seeing that all across the country. Municipals that just quoted 6 months ago, they're coming back double and triple. So it happens everywhere and to everybody, and the quoting's just hard now. So are there any other questions? Just again, to reiterate this, you guys, you're very fortunate that, first of all, your rates are low. The percentages sound scary, but that you're even in a position you can even consider these things, but we still can't just set it and forget it.
Well, I guess I've got, kind of when we're pulling on this thread around this future lining project, and this is just kind of a discussion for the group. Although, when we first talked about it, it seemed like, hey, this is the obvious thing to do. We've got this old pipe here. We could spend some money and make it redundant. Looks like it's going to be pretty expensive, and I guess the question maybe is for you. Maybe you've been around enough, Dawn, around enough municipalities to see how they operate. Is this customary to have a redundant force main? Is this kind of an industry standard? Do most municipalities have a redundant force main? Is this somewhere we want to spend this kind of money?
Yeah, I can answer that.
Yeah, just curious.
So sewer and wastewater, they're two different utilities, obviously, with two different goals. One is supplying a customer with something, one is supplying a treatment plant with something. There's one end point for wastewater, which is the treatment plant. For water, there's hundreds of endpoints. With water, you have the benefit of, when there's many endpoints, you end up over time building out your system so that there's looping involved.
Right.
There's natural redundancies built into that. So like, if there's a project going on somewhere in East Bay, there's a good chance that if you've got to shut a section down of water main to make an extension on it, it's only a low number of people shut down because there's so many different routes and ways to
Yeah, I get that.
get from A to B. With wastewater, you've got right now one A to B route. So I would say the larger a municipality gets, the more important it becomes that you have those redundancies because you've got more and more users flowing through that pipe. We did see when we did the lining along 31 back in 2020, the pipe, and the details are 5 years old in my head, so I'll have to ask for a little grace on that one. But there was a ductile iron pipe that sat empty for a period of time, and the condition of that pipe due to sitting empty deteriorated rapidly due to the H2S gas that sits in it and fills the pipe instead of the pipe being filled with wastewater.
Yeah.
So I would not, if you choose not to line that pipe within the next 5 years, I would not expect the condition to remain what it currently is just because it's not in use.
Right. No, I get that. I guess I'm just looking at it from a, so redundancy is I don't want to say it's a nice to have. It's probably a best practice in
Yeah.
any world. You want to have redundancy, right? But it's also, in this case, it's redundancy. It's more or less it's an insurance program for us, right? Like
Yes.
If the force main over here goes out or it needs service, hey, we can just switch over and go to this other one. It's a luxury, but it's a nice insurance to have, but it's a very expensive insurance program to have sitting
course.
there.
Yeah.
Which is
Well,
one of the
it's not in,
being used.
And right now, part of the cost of not having redundancy is what we're seeing in this project, because given that there's only one line
Yeah.
from East Bay to the plant, we don't have an option to go in and replace sections of line because there's nowhere to divert the flows.
Can't
So-
shut it down for 3 months to put it in a
Correct.
section.
Correct. If there were two lines available right now to send flow through, A or B, you could replace sections of B while you're flowing through A. So,
Is there such
so if I could, oh, go ahead.
a thing as half the volume going through each line?
yeah, that's been discussed with the DPW actually, is once both of these projects are done, even once this single immediate project is done, continuing to flow on a prescribed, determined basis flows through that old line to avoid that rapid deterioration.
That's what I was thinking. If it's going to deteriorate, if it's set empty, we don't want to switch all the flow out of it
Correct.
and leave it deteriorating
Yep.
until we decide if we're going to reline it or not or whatever.
Correct.
Trace, if I could, is it okay?
Go ahead.
Couple things. One, the redundancy, for example, in the water, we did that in 2015, I think, started planning it in 2014. And that was when that system was looped with that new water tower that's at Hammond and 5 Mile. And if you recall, before that, our water system was in the shape of a C. And if we were shut down at any point on that line, the people further down the line were really out of luck. And while water doesn't require the same type of redundancy, it does require some. And as Garth mentioned now, and the Eagle made, as I understood it, East Bay Township undertake that project for the redundancy. So now we have a problem on the line. Water can be rerouted the other way. In this case, with the line, I asked the same question, Matt, when we first had that break. I said, my goodness, what did they expect us to do if there was a line break when they designed this? Of course, that was 50 years ago, right? But 50 years ago isn't that long ago, right? It's like in the 70s. But anyway, I said, what did they expect to do if there was a break? Why don't you design a line like that, or do you not? And engineers had mentioned that typically today, if you're looking at a line there, you would design it with redundancy. Not just as an insurance, but as kind of a best practice with that quantity of waste and how integral that infrastructure is. And then regarding the extra line, Garth is correct. His memory is very good. It was the line that ran along 4 Mile when we did the Curidan Pipe Place that was in horrible condition. They tapped a ballpoint pin on it and it went straight through. And, that is something that we'll take a look at, but the need for redundancy is so great, and that's why we have Garfield Township, who's not a part of this project and opted out to be part of the project, does want to continue negotiations with us on emergency use and routing their waste, because they know they're in a pinch as well. And also Traverse City, in putting on the access points, 2 of them along Parsons, we'll be talking with them as well, because they're having the same concerns. So this line carrying this critical amount from 2 townships is important, and I think we've always known that.
Yeah. So we're putting in a brand new force main for 16 million and to reline a cobbled together, paper thin, 50-year-old line is half of that.
Yeah, I don't know the exact specifics on the lining, but the lining does bolster the lifespan of that asset by a significant number of years.
We talked about this when we were kind of originally planning this project, I don't know, a year ago, and I brought up, like...
Yeah, putting in lines in parallel.
Yeah, why can't we just put 2 lines in?
Yeah.
Will this contractor take a change order for half of $8 million to throw another line in?
You could certainly ask them that. I would
think they did
argue
look
as well
at
that diversity in geography of where the lines are at is also an asset to the township, a benefit to the township, because if you've got 2 lines in tandem running like railroad tracks to the plant, if some future contractor that's working on Garfield happens to damage one, you might lose both. So.
And ask Garfield Township recently, they've had that happen. They've had about 6 breaks in different lines over the past year. Joe McManus is feeling like he won the opposite of the lottery with respect to that. Interestingly enough, too, when they do line that pipe, if they were to need to line the entire pipe or even a portion of it, what's interesting is you don't really lose any capacity with that lining, which I thought was very interesting. And it does restore the integrity of that pipe to a very long, useful life. I don't have the stats on that. That's Garth and his fellow engineers, but it was pretty amazing to me.
How close is, I know those maps are probably old, but how close is the next closest gravity main? Sewer main?
I am not familiar enough with the overall layout to give you a good answer.
I'm going way beyond a township board meeting here. I'm just thinking there's got to be an alternative to $8.6 million to put some epoxy line in on an pipe that probably should just be abandoned.
Yeah, agree.
I mean, couldn't you, you're an engineer, couldn't you, if you had an emergency and you had the means to use that lift station to pump up to the next gravity main, use it, divert it somewhere?
I'm not sure. I do know if East Bay could flow gravity all the way to the plant, I can tell you that an engineer 50 years ago would have done that.
Yeah.
Because lift stations are not something that anybody wants to have. It's something that has to be had when they are in place. If you can do gravity, you do gravity.
Yeah.
Because it's just so much, it's simplified so much more.
Yeah.
And they're money pits.
Yeah,
They wear out. and-
yeah, lift stations and the mains that they discharge into are a higher maintenance asset than gravity. But gravity does have its drawbacks too. It still has to be maintained, which is why lining of some of the gravity main is on the 5-year plan. So,
Well, I've said my piece. The only reason I was kind of on this is I can appreciate Dawn's comments about the fact that, we're under that, median household income threshold, the guidelines you talked about based on, but to be staring in the face of raising rates by 60% over the next 5 years is shocking, so. Seems like there may be another alternative we need to look at.
yep, understandable. Thank you.
Well, and historically, I don't think you might have been here, Matt, but a long time ago, in our region, so many municipalities hadn't raised theirs in any length of time that many municipalities were having double-digit raises. Do you remember that, Trace?
Yep. Yeah, we raised ours quite a bit at,
And we were below some of the others, but Dawn, could you talk a little bit about what Acme Township decided last night?
Sure. So Acme had their meeting, and they are leaning towards just still the $1 million commitment that they talked about. And they were questioning extending the term of the bond. So that's, and they realize they need rate increases. They're taking their rate increase ordinance, I think, to their December 8th or 3rd, or, not December, excuse me, January. Whenever their January 1st, that first meeting is, they are taking the ordinance there, and the board all seemed in favor. It went well. There was no controversy. Great question.
Yeah, I did talk with Doug White today, and he confirmed that they were looking at going for 20 years because of their financial projections, and wanted to know if that's something that East Bay would be doing. And I said, well, we'll see after tonight's presentation, but Don certainly makes the case for that based on our financial situation as well. We will need to redo the resolutions that Don's referring to. You'll recall that East Bay had an agreement in 2 resolutions, and they had the funding amount in there. So we'll need to redo those resolutions as well as the notice to bond that has a 45-day referendum. And we're still in good timing to do that. Though we'll want to decide, do we want to do that at just an East Bay meeting, or if we need to call it another joint meeting of the 2 townships. I told Doug we could talk with Mark Nettleton to see what he suggests based on the board's feedback, Acme's last night and our board's tonight.
so does anybody have anything else for the good?
I am still, you mentioned Acme, and I know it's not our business. But when I look at the numbers and what they said in the meetings before, I don't know, if they don't go 20 years, they really can't afford to do it.
So with the rate, they will be able to with rate adjustments, rate plans. It just makes both sides of this equation, financials, better by extending.
And I believe they're at $35 now a month,
They're at 35.
and they'll be
yeah.
going to close to 60 before they get.
So they were looking at 9.5% as well.
Yeah. Because the only concern I have is, like I say, I shouldn't be dealing in their business, but if they can't make payments, then it falls on us because it's our project.
Well, they will be able to, they've acknowledged, right, that they need to put the right steps in place to make payments. And like I said, there wasn't any controversy there.
Yeah, they
There was
know they
nobody,
have to do
no board members that were saying, we're not doing this, whatever. I think they asked great questions. It was well, as best received as it could be. And again, there was all consensus to spend the, commit the $1 million, try to shoot for a 20-year, and the resolution was going to be brought forth in their January meeting.
Since the whoever holds the bond is not going to be concerned, since we hold the bond and we've got to keep our debt coverage ratio
Right.
Up to standard, then I'm concerned about Acme's. Does that plan align with keeping their debt coverage ratio as close to ours as?
So they don't have to have a debt coverage ratio. They don't.
I understand,
Yeah.
but you can still calculate it based on what they would owe us, right?
So, I look at their cash flow on that side because that'll be an expense to them. But I can look at it as if that debt payment, were their actual debt payment, their portion of that. But it's actually an expense to them. So I didn't calculate a debt coverage ratio on their side.
But I think maybe what Matt too is getting at is, are they putting up as much as they can? Do they have like additional funding that they're not utilizing, I guess, maybe?
In the same exact situation as you guys. So what I recommended was not spending down right now on this project because of the relining project. So we held, if you will, $500,000 for that project. So they could spend $1 million today, $500,000 then. They've got capital improvements on their side as well. And their cash spends down to at least half as well.
Yeah, I know they had talked in one of the last meetings that they were wondering about $1 million to $1.5 million to put up for this, and that would make sense to hold it off for the
For the line.
for the next.
So,
One of the questions that they did ask, which maybe when you renegotiate or whatever, is early payment penalty. Like, is the bond going to have an early payment penalty? I read the ordinance that you guys had. I didn't recall seeing anything in there about that.
It can't be early paid back is what I remember.
Okay. Because they did ask
that's what
about
they
that.
about bonds, right?
Pardon?
Didn't you mention that you can't pay bonds back early?
Right, and I think
Typically, there's a recall
Andy,
date.
yeah, there was something about that, because we did have a recall date on one of our bonds that we did years ago, but it seems like either Andy or Mark Nettleton, Andy Campbell or Mark Nettleton, said that we could not do a recall
Okay. And I
date
don't know.
on it. So I don't,
That is one
that
of
would
the
be a
questions
question
they
for them,
asked.
not for, I don't want to answer that.
Yeah, and that is one of the questions they asked, though, and it's a good
Yeah.
one, right?
Right.
Because what
Oh,
if
yeah.
we're all being too conservative,
Well, because I had the same thoughts too, but.
undershoot this, then, they were saying, well, maybe we can just pay the bond off early in the discussion and suit that. We don't know if that language,
Yeah, because we have done that in the past through the county, when we did bonding with other jurisdictions and the county holding the bond. But, because we went through that process, I don't know, back when Bill Rokas was still here. But I recall the same thing, as one of them said that we couldn't do that this
Okay.
time, but I don't know.
And I think if I had my druthers, guys, what I would do is have another joint meeting and once we know what cash we're putting in and what we're financing, because that was the two questions, then to have a joint meeting and have Mark and Andy there.
Yeah.
Because then we are starting to, utilize those contracts and pull the plug on getting the financing going after the 45-day wait period.
and keep in mind, you guys could consider, like I said, showed you, the 2 million, but the pieces would have to fall in place with the 20-year payback and those types of things, and looking at that.
Right. Any other? Yep.
So I have a silly question. Pipe in East Bay Township is East Bay Township's pipe, so that's why we have to do the funding and we have to do everything. But what happens why is it still ours when it goes into the city? Couldn't that be Acme's portion of it? Do they bond their own?
I don't
So
think so.
I don't know the layout, but the ordinance is even written that you guys approved in July, that it would be East Bay's asset.
So we would,
The resolution.
Mindy, we would not want to have a infrastructure like that in our name that ends in a line that belongs to somebody else. And we do have, when it is in the city, we have it in an easement and in the right of way. So we would still have ownership of that.
Okay.
Correct, Garth?
Yeah, just to add historical
You gotta go to the mic, please.
Just to add a little bit of history to that, the East Bay line predates the Acme line. So Acme tied into the line that East Bay had already constructed all the way to the plant.
Did East Bay construct that, or was it a city line that we took over?
Given that it's older than me, I can't guarantee it.
My understanding
I believe East Bay constructed.
Yeah, we have some history on that, and we're kind of going through that history right now.
Because my recollection is that we took over the city line, but that's...
Okay, it's very possible.
It's kind of before my time, too, you know, so...
I was just trying to make it so we didn't have such a big a debt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
Anyway,
Hey, Beth, back to the question I was asking about assumptions around sewer revenues and basically new users. How many units in East Bay are going to be coming online next year? Do you know roughly?
Oh, gosh. Well, we did account for those because we went through these with Dawn. We just had in this year, Live East Bay come on, the Allen Edmond project on 4 Mile. And they,
I think it was like
they're-
170.
175 was the next year, 2026. I can look up that.
Well, and just to be clear, I thought when we were having that conversation, you said you didn't account for those on the revenue side.
I accounted for
Yep.
the benefits or the connection, but not the usage,
Okay.
which would be, I don't want to say minuscule, but I mean, it's not going to change the projection. It's going to just improve the targets.
Right.
we also,
Connection fees.
knowing how aggressive that Crimson's going after that too, we also have benefit fees for those, that's the 240 units.
Well, I was just calculating, maybe my calculation's off, but 250 units if everyone's individually metered at our current rate.
Remember one thing though, Matt, I know you're going to throw out a big number there, but remember one thing, we have a policy that they can put down 20% and then they can finance the rest of that benefit fee.
He's trying to figure out the usage fee. The usage.
Oh,
Yeah, the $27. I mean, that's
Got you.
250 units, if that's a round number. I don't know if y'all, that's what it came up. I mean, it's $82,000 a year. It's not insignificant.
No, but it's not huge. I mean, it's going to just better our numbers. It's not going to be enough to alter them, I don't think.
240 is in the 2026 number.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me, I have growth at 2.5% in there. Oh, excuse me, that's investment income. No, never mind.
you got something in there.
She didn't have any percentages in.
Yeah, so,
It's going up, so something's gotta be going on.
That's the rate increase.
I didn't think the rate increase came until later on.
It's in 26.
Oh, the 3.5% that's currently,
9.5.
but I didn't think that was on page 2.
well, what's going up though is,
Inflation.
no,
The
not
3.5%.
inflation on the revenue side, but, you've got special assessments are going up a little tiny bit, your other revenue's going up a little tiny bit.
No, I was thinking the sewage disposal charges, that's going up to 3.5. And I'm on page 2.
You're looking at, that revenue is not just sewer disposal charges though.
Okay, but what's taking it up?
So show me what number you're talking about here. On page 2.
Yep. The bottom table. The first one, the sewage disposal charges, is going up as you go across.
Yeah, so.
Is that the 3.5%?
That table included the rate increase, and it shouldn't have. It doesn't affect the study or the analysis. That was just a copy table I stuck in there last minute.
So this is at the 3.5 or the 9.5?
That's at the 9.5.
Okay.
Yeah, that should be stable across there. I'll fix that table.
Okay.
Do you guys have any other questions?
And we can always filter questions to you, email through Beth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Also, can we move forward with consensus that we will move forward planning on a $1 million contribution and then looking at the financing at 20 years?
When we have a meeting, we can.
Well, that's kind of what this meeting was supposed to look at with Dawn's expertise.
And I didn't ask this question because I just assumed. You projected out the debt coverage ratios with the rate increases at the 20 years. And those weren't even like, they were right on the.
It was
So
1.12.
there's no option to go to a 15-year. That's just going to make that situation
That will
worse.
take that worse.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
I'll make it between those two exact tables I showed you, and envision it'll be right between those two, because one was 10 and one was 20.
Yeah, one's 0.82 and 1.12.
And Beth, just so I understand, kind of back to the separate projects, we've got the current project that was kicked off today, the big one,
Yep.
we got the next big one that is the liner project. We're not talking about financing the liner project right now, are we? Are we talking about doing the whole thing right now?
No.
We're not financing, the bond would not include the liner project. There's too many variables at this point.
Okay, good.
But you would need to buy in the future for that.
Yeah,
With
I think
Unless we had a lot of things go our way.
this is a little bit drinking out of a fire hose for all of us. Even though we've been talking about this, we're
For
talking about the
2+
project,
years.
we're talking about rate increases, we're talking about, projections on where the fund is gonna be, and then it's kind of commingled with a lot of discussion, my fault, around future projects that are unknown.
Yeah, taking us down to the 10 years or the 15 years takes us below that 1.12. I don't think that that's advisable. Again, I think the 20-year matches the life of the infrastructure, which it is less than the life of the infrastructure, which I think is important. And I don't think with the projects that we have, we want to bind up more of our cash than we need to. Also, the more we bond with Acme, the less we may have to bond later if things, are in our favor. Obviously, there's some economies of scale, and right now we're sharing costs with Acme versus on any project in the future where we might not be. We want to keep that cash for those independent projects where we're by ourselves and we don't have to shoulder the costs of the bonds on our own.
I guess to answer your question, from my point of view, I would support the 20-year plan. Sounds the most obvious at this point.
Right.
Question for you, Dawn, I guess kind of twofold here, and you probably had to tiptoe around it, but, don't be shy. Is a little bit of moment of self-reflection for East Bay Township. Have we sort of done ourselves a little bit of injustice in years past by not adjusting the sewer rate?
Okay, that's kind of a loaded question because what has helped you, correct, you should have had small incremental rate increases. That's why I said I loved the plan you guys have. What has helped you are the benefit fees, the growth that you've had, you're living off, if you will, those.
So without that, obviously the situation would be much worse.
Obviously, much worse.
Okay.
And I think, in all fairness, it's all of us, it's me included. We don't like to see those. It feels great to not increase those rates. And we're not in a boat on our own. I mean, Dawn just told you that's the majority of the cases that she sees.
Yeah.
But I think it's smart for us to adjust it and do what we did about a year ago and continue to keep those at a smaller pace. Now, we will have a little bit of an aberration in the next 3-4 years where we've got that increase with sewer and not with the water. But we'll look to even that out so we get to that marginal COLA type increase in the future.
And on that topic, I don't know if you've seen this with other municipalities, is there I don't know if this creates turmoil in the community, people probably don't like it, but is there a way to kind of take a bigger bite of the apple, like in year one, and say, hey, we're going to do a one-time 25% increase, and then do 4.5%?
Yeah, absolutely, you can do that. I did try to keep it under double digits. Just, that's kind of seems to be the magical number, if you can keep it under double digits. But honestly, for you to even go to a 20% rate increase, you're talking about $5 a month.
Yeah.
And I understand that, that it's still $5 a month, but it just sounds a lot scarier to say 20% than $5 a month.
But would, I mean, I don't know, you'd have to run numbers, would that materially change the cash position
Probably.
to have it front-loaded like that?
It probably would, and it probably would bring you to your debt coverage ratio quicker, because you've got then the cumulative effect of that right up front.
I would go for something like that. I mean, don't get me wrong, moving to East Bay Township, when I first moved here, one of my favorite things was getting my first water bill and seeing how low it was.
So low.
Yeah.
And so are the sewer rates.
I hate to see it go up, but it's a natural.
That's one of the things, Matt, I've never gotten a complaint on for our water and sewer rates. People have complained about other things, but that's one we don't.
Yeah. Well, most municipalities around the country, they track their sewer rate as a function of water volume, so.
Yeah,
To have a fixed amount to begin with is nice.
yeah.
How do the rest of the board members feel about the 20-year and the $1 million contribution?
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with Matt. I think that's the better way to go at this point in time. And if we can avoid some of that financing later with the televising of it and figuring out exactly what we need, and I think that's only going to put us in a better place.
I agree.
I'm okay with the 20 years. I think we have to have more discussion on the contribution. I also think we need a lot more discussion on what these other projects are, the $1.9 million and the $5 million. Some of us don't even know what those are, what you're talking about.
Agreed, Matt. We do. Those are our best guesses working with our engineering staff. But you're exactly right about that. And I think what we can do about the 1 million versus the 2 million is, as we publish the notice of intent to bond, what we can do is it based on the 1 million. Okay, and we can get that referendum period going. And then we can take a look at that with our next meeting with Andy and Mark, and if need be, Dawn at that time too, and say our remaining question for East Bay is 1 versus 2 million. We'll see if anything's changed significantly in the fund by that point. But at least that lets me get going with us getting that notice of intent of funding out there and getting that amount adjusted, as Mark Nettleton has advised us, to get that done.
Quickly too, between the 1 and 2 million also to get the question answered about early payback, because that might help you decide between the
Yeah.
1 and 2 and let
Yeah.
the dust settle. Only put the 1
Yeah.
down, and then if you can do early payback after the dust settles, then pay that down. So I would get that answered too.
That's a great point. Great point.
Because I don't know, I don't want to put words in Matt's mouth, but the 8.3, the lining of that pipe, you know, it went from just, when it was first discussed, wasn't too significant. Now it's pretty significant. And, you know, we got a piece of infrastructure that's been in the ground for 50 years and haven't had too many problems with it. And the new one that's
You know,
going in is
you're
supposed to be a lot better, so.
Yeah, you're thinking a little bit like Doug and I were talking today, which was not with the benefit of Garth's comments. You know, Doug and I were saying today, you know, with that large number looming, with the new line, it's maybe not as critical on the timing of that, as we've wanted to speed along on this project. Listen, Mark Hurley said to us about 6 months ago, I haven't seen a project, which is hard for me to believe, but move this fast. He said he's been with a lot of municipalities who start to plan something of this magnitude and don't pull the trigger on it. But we need it with this. I don't want to be in that position again that we saw that break. It's too critical. But when we're in the next point, you know, we can be a little bit more flexible and see where we're at. Though I will say that that was made without the comment of, hey, if we let that line sit, it's probably harder on that line than using it. Kind of like a car motor, right? But we can have those discussions in the future. This topic tonight, and I appreciate everybody's ability to attend and their questions and comments that were really good, because it gets us to a point where we need to be with Benzinski and Company, and having Mark assist with that, and gets us through the next 45-day referendum.
So what I would like from you guys is to see what happens. How can we maybe not do that line, the relining in 3 years? What if we go 5 years? What if we partially use that line to extend that period so we don't have to front so much money so
Certainly.
quickly?
So when we get in there, and not we being Wade Trim, but when the township hires a contractor to televise and inspect that main, if you find 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 foot sections that look good, the cement lining is still in good condition, there's no sign of the steel behind the lining exposed, when that cement lining's gone, that's when you know you're in dire straits. But if that cement lining is in good condition for significant chunks of the main, that's when the township can really start to look at, hey, let's line 3,000 feet this year. Let's line 3,000 feet that doesn't look quite as bad, but looks like it needs some attention soon, a couple years later.
Okay.
That 8.3 within the next 5 years is under the assumption that the entire line is not in good shape. But until you get in there and look at it, you don't know. And hopefully you find out that you can do these incremental repairs of budgeting for a chunk each year for a number of years.
Okay,
So
okay.
it's certainly, if chunks are in good shape, it's certainly not a we have to do all of this at once period
Right.
kind of project anymore.
Yeah, but see, we're basing our financing now on the fact that.
Yeah, you're planning for the worst.
For the worst. And,
Yep.
it's really skewed things.
Well, I guess along those lines, we talked about, how do you, sounds like even with the investment of this liner, you would still have to put it in use periodically, right? To kind of keep the integrity up. It just can't sit there.
Correct, yeah. So the date of the lining project, I believe on the projection that Brian gave was 2027.
Yeah.
That line would be incrementally used still between now and 2027. It would not sit empty for the next 2 years.
But even after we invest in the liner, it couldn't sit empty, right?
Well, you're at a different state at that point. That lining will not erode due to the gas at the rate that ductile iron pipe will. It's much more chemically stable to those corrosive gases.
But would we get less useful life out of it by having it empty?
It would still be wise to run it, yeah, because it keeps the sediment moving in it. Every time you shut the line down, everything that's in the line stops. So to periodically still move that stuff along, it's advisable.
Operationally, what's involved in doing that?
The DPW just doing what they do and operating valves. Yep,
You're good?
yeah, exactly.
And that's why they've engineered in valves at different checkpoints throughout the line. The other thing too, I'll just say is, there are a lot of unknowns that we don't know right now, and I'm going to just throw this one out there. The city contacted us, even though we met with them 2 years ago, they were well apprised of this project. They recently contacted us and are looking for those emergency connections. Well, one of the other topics we talked about, because they said, we can't do any more right now. We are not delaying this project. We've involved everybody up to this point. And if you're just thinking about it now, then that's an issue. But we can at least do those emergency valves that they will pay for. But what we have yet to do is have a fuller discussion on what constitutes an emergency, what they would pay to use the line, and also any impact, if they're anticipating any, with the airport enlargement and the sewer system that way. So there's lots of still unknowns and a lot of work and discussion there.
Well, we'll have some more zeros in the revenue side of that table. Sounds like we're gonna be making some money now.
Maybe we should have led with that part. I don't know. I'm not saying that's, I mean, I hesitate to even say that at a public meeting because it's so unknown,
Okay, any more questions? And we have no public for public comment, so if there's no objections, we can stand adjourned. Meeting is next Monday.
All right.
Thanks, guys. I'll see you. We were supposed to head back on Friday, but we're done and we're heading back tomorrow. So
Good for you.
if you can make it not snow and no delays in Chicago, I'd appreciate it.
All right, have a good